Today's topic is the skeleton. In this, we will discuss and learn about the types of bones, the basic structure of bone, then structure of short, irregular, and sesamoid bones, then microscopic structure of bone, then development of bone tissue, how our bones get developed and they get ossified, then functions of our bone. Then we will continue with our divisions of skeleton. The one is the axial skeleton and second is the appendicular skeleton. Okay, all this will be covered in this topic. So let us start with our topic. We will continue with our bone. So as we are talking about the bone, let us see how the bone has been consist of. So here you can see the bone is a strong and durable type of connective tissue. What it is? It is a connective tissue and it has a strongness and durability. So bone is consists of 20% of water, then organic constituents including osteoids, the carbon containing part of the matrix, and the 25% bone cells. So 25% water is present in our bone, then 25% of organic constituents and bone cells, 25%. The remaining 50% is the organic inorganic constituents, which is mainly calcium phosphate that is present in the bone. So in this diagram, we can see this is the bone, and if we take the structure of bone, you will see a normal bone has the processes which are divided into different parts. We can call them as an epiphysis, then diaphysis that can be acting as a shaft of that bone, and the epiphysis of the other end. So one bone has two epiphyses, that is the end of the bones, and the middle portion is called as the diaphysis. So this is the diaphysis, and in this diagram you can see this is the internal structure of the bone has been shown here. So how this internal structure appears? So internally the bone has a cancellous bone that is containing the red bone marrow. Then the outer layer of the bone is called as the periosteum. Then inside the bone there is a hollow cavity which is having the bone marrow, that is a yellow type of bone marrow, and this called as the medullary canal. The here in the shaft region, that is the diaphysis region, you can see the compact bone is present here, the compact bone. Then the nutrient artery which is passing through the foramen of the bone to supply the internal structure of the bone, so that the bone marrow gets supplied with the blood and oxygens and nutrients, and this is done by this artery which is passing inside the bone. So this is shown in the diagram you can see here. The epiphysis has again a outer layer that is called as the articular layer or articular cartilage, which is made up of the hyaline cartilage. This is one of the type of cartilage which makes or keeps the bones in joined or together. They get joined and have the capacity to act as a, we can say, to reduce the friction between the two bones, because the bones are the hard in nature, and if they get joined together and without there is a any lubrication or the any joining, they will not be in a together. And to prevent that friction between two bones, the while the movement or any type of movement, there is a friction occurs between the bone. To reduce that friction, the hyaline cartilage is present and some lubricants are present while the joining the bones. So this is the normal structure of our bone. and which is having, we can see here, the complete structure. You can see here the epiphysis and the diaphysis, which is called as the shaft. So the outer layer of the bone is a hard one, so that is made up of the periosteum. Internally, it has a medullary canal which contains the yellow bone marrow, and at the epiphysis end, they have the red bone marrow. So bone has both yellow and red bone marrow, which are very important for the production of the various different cells in our body, the blood cells which are generated or products in this bone marrows. Then uh, the structure of short bone, irregular bone, and flat and sesamoid bone. So what is the, we have looked here is it is a long bone. It is a structure of a mature long bone. That is the adult long bone. While the other bones which are in short in structure, irregular in structure, then flat and sesamoid bones have the relatively thin layer of compact bone with cancellous bone inside which it contains the red bone marrow. They are enclosed by periosteum and they has internally has a red bone marrow present in that bones. So here you can see the flat bone which is present in our skull, which has a compact bone, but the layer is very thin that compared to that of the long bone. And inside it, it has a cancellous bone which containing the red bone marrow. The red color is shown here. That is a red bone marrow. So you can see this. This is the red bone marrow, and this is having the cancellous bone. Hmm? And the outer layer is the compact layer. This is the irregular shape bone which is present in the vertebral column. The vertebrae of our human being are of different shapes, and each region of vertebral column have the different structure of vertebra. So they are called as the irregular shaped bone. And again, these having the same constituent as that of the flat bone. The compact bone outer layer, and inside it is having the cancellous bone which containing the bone marrow. Okay, so this is the flat bone and the irregular bone. So the next we will continue with the microscopic structure of the bone. So microscopic structure of the bone, when we are observe it under the microscope, we will see the compact bone is, we will see it with the naked eye, but inside it, it has a various different structure and different cells which are present it and coming together and arranged very compactly so that it gives a very hard and solid appearance that makes the bone. So the internally, uh, when we see microscopically, it has a Haversian system which has Haversian canal and which contains blood and lymph vessels, nerves, which are surrounded by concentric rings or plates of the bone, which are called as the lamellae. So we will see here in the diagram the microscopic structure of the compact bone. When we take the section, here you can see this is the Haversian system, and Haversian system has this in there, the various nerve supply, then blood vessel supply, and inside it, it has the structure, a rectangular structure which are called as the lamellae, and this is nothing but the central Haversian canal which is having or have the space for passing of the blood vessels through that canal. and which supplies the blood and nutrients to the bone. So this the Haversian system. Here you can see a single Haversian systems come together to form the bone and gives the compact arrangement of this bone. The lacuna, which is a part of this Haversian system, we will see the lacuna is having showing this kind of structure. This is the canal through which the blood vessel is passing, and this is the lamellae, and inside it has a canaliculus, then osteocytes, which is nothing but what? The bone cells. Osteocytes are nothing but the bone cells. So between these are the lacunae, the tiny spaces which containing the tissue fluid and has a bone cells which are nothing but the osteocytes which forms the bone basically, and this gives the arrangement that is called as the tubular arrangement of lamellae, and it gives the bone a greater strength than the solid structure of the same size. So due to this arrangement of this lamellae, a rectangular arrangement in the Haversian system, it gives a strength to the bone and it will not get break easily comparative to as that of the structure of the same size. So the compact bone has this arrangement while the cancellous bone inside it which have a trabecular or spongy bone which is a cancellous bone has a honeycomb like structure. Here you can see honeycomb like structure means it has a bone which is a slightly smoother than the compact bone, and inside it having the dotted which dots are like appear like a honeycomb, so it is having a honeycomb like structure. So in the microscopic observation it reveals a framework which is forms the trabeculae, which means the little beams which consist of few lamellae and osteocytes interconnected by canaliculi, and the spaces between the trabecle contain the red bone marrow and that nourish our bone cells that are the osteocytes. Let us see the different types of bone cells which are present in our um, bone. So here in this diagram you can see this is the trabeculae, microscopic structure of the cancellous bone. Here you can see this is the honeycomb structures. You can see the spaces for the red bone marrow, and the red bone marrow supplies the osteocytes, the nutrients, and these get nourished here with this bone marrow. While different types of bone cells are present, the cells responsible for bone formation are osteoblasts, and later when they get mature, they called as the osteocytes. So osteoblasts and chondrocytes, which are cartilage forming cells that develop from the same parent fibrous tissue cells, and the differentiation into the osteogenic cells and chondroblast takes place that gives the adequate oxygen supply. When there is an adequate oxygen supply, the osteogenic cells can be converted to chondroblast, which is needs an oxygen supply. This may be a factor affecting the healing of fractures. That is, if the oxygen supply is decreased, there may be a preponderance of chondroblast resulting in the cartilaginous union of the fracture. So we can see if there is a less oxygen supply, this will affect the healing of the fractures when we have any type of injury of the bone. Then the osteoblast, these are the bone forming cells which secretes the collagen and other constituents of the bone tissue. They present in the deeper layers of the periosteum. They are in the centers of the ossification of immature bone. Then at the site of fractures in the cartilages of long bones. The mature forms of osteoblasts are osteocytes, which get forms as the bone develops. That becomes the osteocytes. They stop forming new bone at this stage and are called as osteocytes later on. The osteocytes are nourished by the tissue fluid in the canaliculi that radiate from the Haversian canal. Their functions are not clear, but they may be associated with the movement of calcium between the bones and the blood. Okay, so this is the primary function of osteocyte, the movement of calcium from the bones to the blood. Then osteoclast, their function is the resorption of bone to maintain the optimum shape. So the shape of the bone is depend on the osteoclast. So under the periosteum, to maintain the shape of the bone during the growth from the childhood to the adulthood, then healing of fractures, then there is a fine balance between osteoblast and the osteoclast activity that maintain the normal bone structure and the functions. So these different cells like osteoblast, then osteocytes and osteoclast have a balance between themselves to maintain the bone structure and functions of the bone. So here you can see how the bone get developed. The development of bone tissue, that is the osteogenesis or ossification process. This begins before the birth and is not complete until about the 21st year of the life. So here you can see the long, short and irregular bones develop from the rods of cartilage, then cartilage models. The flat bone develop from the membrane models and sesamoid bones develop from the tendon models. So bone development consists of two processes. First is the secretion by osteoblasts, that is osteoids, that is the collagen fibers, and second is the calcification of osteocyte, that is the immediately after its deposition. So you can see here when in the fetal development the bone has this type of shape, the primary center of ossification here. It starts ossification from the mid to the end. So, okay. So after birth, these sections start uh, developed secondary centers of ossification of epiphysis. Then up in the childhood of the adult cells, it get develops like this. The cancellous bone, then hyaline cartilage start developing at the epiphysis end, the medullary canal, and in the adult, it get ossified very rapidly and get a firm structure so that it is not having any developing structure in the bone. So it takes very much time to get the fracture to heal. So comparative to the childhood, our adult bones takes much time to get recover after the fractures or bone damage. So this is our skeleton system. The diagram is showing here the anterior view and the side view of our skeleton system as shown here. So axial skeleton, which is shown in the yellow color here, which consists of the skull, then our vertebral column, then thoracic cage. Hmm? This is the axial skeleton, while the white color skeleton as shown as an appendicular skeleton. So, so this is very important for the study in the practical also. So this is the skull, which have the cranium. Then the axial skeleton have the, we can see the 80 bones here, and the appendicular skeleton consists of 126 bone in the adult, while in the at the time of birth in the child there are the 306 bones are present. So after they get fused together, they reduce to the numbers, that is 206 in the adult, and the axial skeleton consists of this two division, the skull and the thoracic region and the vertebral column. So vertebral column has the 26 bone. In that the cervical region has the cervical vertebrae, then thoracic vertebrae, then lumbar vertebrae is here. Then this is the sacrum, which is a fused bone of 5 vertebrae, and the coccyx, which is a fused bone or which is formed by the 4 vertebrae, which is also called as the monkey bone. So the cranium has 28 bones and facial bones, including the facial bones, it has a 28 bones. And thoracic cage has here the 12 ribs on the left side, 12 ribs on the right side, the sternum, that is 25 bones which form the thoracic cage. So 25, then 26, and here the 28. So all these having the axial skeleton. Then the appendicular skeleton is consist of the upper limb and the lower limb, which have the upper limbs have the pectoral girdle, that is the shoulder girdle, which is having the 2 scapula, left and right side one. Then this is the clavicle here. It is also called as the collarbone. Then it has the left hand and right hand, which has the humerus. Then radius and ulna. The radius is outer bone and the ulna is the inner bone. So the radius ulna on the both hands. Then the carpals, that are nothing but the wrist bones. Then metacarpals, then phalanges. The 14 phalanges, 5 metacarpal bones, 8 carpal bones, then 2 radius ulna and 2 humerus, which forms the upper limbs of our appendicular skeleton. While the lower limbs, which have the pelvic girdle, here these are the pelvic girdle and the bones attached to the these pelvic girdle are the legs. This is the femur. This is the longest bone of our body. This is the patella. It is also called as the kneecap. And downside there the tibia, fibula. Then tarsals, the ankle bones. Then metatarsals. Then phalanges. Okay. So this forms the appendicular skeleton of our body. So the skull of our body is axial skeleton, which forms the skull of our, which consists of the skull, then vertebral column, ribs, and the sternum. Together, the bones forming these structures constitute the central bony part of our body, that is the axis. So it is named as the axial skeleton. So the skull, in the practical, we will have this. So remember this: the skull rests on the upper end of the vertebral column, and it's a bony structure. It is divided into 2 parts, the cranium and the face. So the cranium has the different flat bones and irregular bones that provides the protection to the brain. It forms the cavity in which the brain is located, and it acts as a vault to protect our brain, which is one of the delicate organ, by forming the cranial cavity. The cranium has the joints which are called as the sutures. The These are the immovable joints, which is also called as the fibrous joints. Here you can see on the in the skull. So the skull is formed by the one frontal bone, 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, one occipital bone, one sphenoid bone, one ethmoid bone. So in this diagram you can see the skull. So this is the frontal bone, and this is the suture. This is called as the coronal suture, which joins the frontal bone and the parietal bone. Then this is the temporal bone. Then this is occipital bone, the short backside of our skull. In, uh, in this region, the small brain is present. Then this is the sutures which joins the parietal bone and the temporal bone are the squamous suture. This is the suture, that is lambdoidal suture, which joins to parietal and occipital bone. So these sutures are immovable. They do not move. They are immovable joints so that our skull remains, our cranium remains intact and protection of the brain takes place. The frontal bone, below that there is a sphenoid bone. Here you can see the blue color. This is the sphenoid bone. So this forms the cranium. And this is one frontal bone, two parietal bone on the left and right side, two temporal bone, one on the left right, one occipital bone at the back, then one sphenoid bone and one ethmoid bone. So all these are forming the cranium. So it is about 8 bones which form the cranium. Then the facial bones which forms nasal bone located in the nose region, then ethmoid bone, then lacrimal bone of our eyes where the lacrimal glands are present and through which the tears are secreted. Then zygomatic bone, which are the cheek bones. Then maxilla, in which these are the sockets where the teeth are located and fixed. Our tooth